Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode number 16 of Entrepreneur Gains, where I interview Y Combinator alumni. On today's show, I have John Kim, co founder and CEO of Sendbird, the number one chat API for mobile apps and websites. They help businesses build direct messaging and group chat quickly on their applications. Their customers include Reddit, Yahoo, Hinge, Paytm, Gojek, Delivery Hero, just to name a few. They have raised over $120 million in funding and employed 250 people across 7 different cities worldwide. After selling his first startup, Paprika Lab, a gaming startup with 5 million plus users, John started Smile Mom, a community app for mothers to socialize and exchange information. They later ended up pivoting the company and focusing full time on messaging after constant interest from other developers and businesses about the chat feature. John also has a blog called Positive Tenacity and a knowledge base called Startup Stacks, where he shares his thoughts and notes about things he's learning personally and about building and scaling startups. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Hey, John, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm super excited to talk to you, man. I have a lot of questions, but before we start, I want the viewers to know everything about Sendbird. So, what is Sendbird, and how does your platform work, and any numbers you can share?
Yep. Sendbird, we are the world's number one chat API. We power user-to-user messaging in other mobile applications as well as websites through SDKs and APIs as a white label solution. Today, we power over 100 million users that chat through our platform every month. Customers like Reddit, Yahoo, Delivery Hero, a lot of customers that are kind of in the consumer brands have used us for their user-to-user interactions. We also have released voice and video calling capabilities, as well as a white-labeled customer support solution called Desk. So that's kind of what we do. We have raised $120 million in total funding so far and have about 250 people across 7 different cities around the world. And our customer base is also quite distributed across the world. And we are YC Winter 16.
Perfect.
So that's what we are.
Awesome. So I kind of like to divide the podcast in two sections. One, I want to ask you a lot of questions, but first, I want to know about your story, right? Like, how did you get into the startup world? Like, how I know I did some research that you've had your first startup which got acquired. So I want to know how all that happened and to get to where we're at right now.
Sounds good. Should I just get going?
Yeah, wherever you want to start, wherever you want to start, whatever you
Yeah,
feel
yeah,
fun talking
yeah.
about.
So I think, sorry for the noise, kids running around. Um, so I started my journey as a founder, I guess late 2007. Really good time to start a company with the financial crisis and all. Nobody wants to back startups that are not making money, but it's actually really a good time because there's not a lot of competition, and you really get to focus on what you're trying to achieve. So my initial company started out as a Web 2.0 company, yet building yet another social network with Ajax and Ruby on Rails and things like that. And we built for about a year, but we ended up realizing investors didn't want to invest in Web 2.0 companies anymore. And I had a background in gaming. I used to work for a gaming company called NCSoft, was a software engineer, and then I was also a professional gamer back in the days. So investors were like, hey, you should create games. So, but instead, because I had a little bit of that Web 2.0 background, I wanted to do something social. So we, instead of creating a traditional game, we went on to build a social game. Like we were one of those guys who spam me on Facebook, hey, invite friends to kill other friends and pay us money to do it. So it kind of worked out. We grew to about 5 million users in total. Then we got acquired by this company called Gree. They're a public company in Japan. I don't speak Japanese, they spoke English. So it kind of worked out. And then stayed there briefly and then left and started a second company with the buddies from my first startup. So we've been working together for good 13 years now. And then initially we again started out as a consumer app company, building a community app, location-based community app for moms, connecting other moms in your area with some of those kids, buy and sell used baby products and so forth. And then we did that for about 2.5 years. We went through Techstars with that in 2014. And then we grew to about 250,000 moms across the world. Actually, 90% of moms were in the US. So we kept on building. I think it was around 2015 when Mary Meeker came out with a report saying, hey, messaging app took over the world. Conversational UI is a new big thing. WeChat, WhatsApp, all sorts of things kind of have been kind of the king of the app across all the app stores across different countries. So kind of look at that, and we want to add that feature for our own application to drive engagement, retention, and so forth. And then we started this journey as a buyer. And because we didn't have money, we obviously looked at open sources. We tried a whole bunch of open source framework across different abstraction layers. We realized a lot of the open source solutions were built for the desktop era, wasn't really for the modern mobile app experience. And also a lot of them had architectural limitations, aren't able to scale horizontally and stuff like that. So we ended up ripping all that out, then went on to other SaaS offerings. Back then, like a company called Layer was just announced, but they didn't really launch their product yet. So we went to Firebase, another YC that got acquired by Google. So we built on top of Firebase and realized, okay, Firebase is really good for quick prototyping for chat, but wasn't really, again, like a production ready that works at scale. So we had to kind of build our workarounds and hacks around it to really build like a modern experience, and got too complicated. So again, we ripped that out again, and then ended up building the entire chat stack ourselves, which kind of became the genesis for Sendbird. Again, around the time, the kind of zeitgeist of the founders were, how do we build messaging? How do we build conversation UI? So a lot of our friends kind of came my way asking for advice around how to build this. So we kind of walked them through the journey. They're like, can we just like skip all of that and just use what you guys built? Because we want those features. We're like, no, that's not what we do. I don't do B2B. I don't do SI. Like, we don't sell software. We are B2C. They're like, we'll pay you. I'm like, well, we're running out of money. We had zero revenue for like close to 3 years. Why don't we explore this? So we did a hackathon, pulled it down to SDK, and then started selling on the sideline. And then I didn't know how to price products. So I'm like, okay, like what's the most amount of money we'd be willing to pay for chat? And so I was like quoting like $50 a month. But my friend was like, sure, let's do it. I'm like, okay. So I went to the next friend, like asking for $150 a month. Sure. So I'm like, oh my God, I just tripled the price and still want the customer. So I just walked around just randomly quoting random prices, and ended up having like 20 paying customers with different pricing points. So we applied to YC with that idea. And then our partners were Justin Kahn and Michael Seibel, both co-founders of Twitch. So obviously they knew a thing or two about chat. So that's kind of how we got in. And then we kept on growing while we had this mom community app. It was up and running, but we knew this was kind of like having a life of its own. So we ended up shutting down this app probably like almost 18 months, maybe 2 years after launching Sendbird. So ultimately fully focused on Sendbird after, I guess, Series A. So that's kind of how we started.
Journey of Sendbird. Amazing. And one thing though, like when you started your first startup, you said like 3 of your co-founders were were there with in your first startup as well. Were they like college friends? Were they like, how did you guys meet, and how did that?
Yeah, not necessarily school friends. Yeah. So 2 of the co-founders at Sendbird worked as an employee or director level at my first company. And because of my first company was a gaming company, most people in gaming industry will stay in gaming industry. Okay. But I kind of saw them as like, okay, these people are not going to continue to make games. They're going to build services. So when I started a new company, I want to, work with them. So I kind of like flagged it had a mental note in my head. And as soon as we got acquired, we're like, okay, let's get together. Let's discuss ideas. We didn't realize we were going to start that soon. We thought it was going to be a few years later. Yeah. But we ended up starting like probably 7 months after, before the investing was over and things like that. But anyway, one person I knew from my middle school days, he was running game servers on Kali. I don't know if you remember, there's such a thing called Kali. I was playing a lot of Duke Nukem, Quake, Doom, stuff like that. So I was kind of like this arrogant teenager who thought he was the best player and was like trashing everyone. So he kind of remembered me as this like really, kind of like a bad behavior teenager. I kind of remembered as a server admin. So we kept in touch, and we kind of reconnected after starting my first company. It's like, oh, okay, everyone who used to play games now have jobs. So we kind of met in the industry, which is a good serendipitous moment. My CTO, or now chief architect, I met him through a mutual intro. There was a guy who used to intern at my first company, and then he went to Stanford and Apple and stuff like that, who actually is the current CTO of Sendbird. Wow. But anyway, he interned at the company, my first company, and while he was heading to US to study abroad at Stanford, he made an introduction to Harry, who joined my first company and worked there for years, and then we ended up selling. Then he became the CTO of my second company, and it kind of came full circle when we pivoted to Sendbird. We lured back this intern who now was an experienced engineer at Apple, like we invited him back in as a VP of Eng, and when Harry kind of stepped aside as a chief architect, VP of Eng became the CTO. So we've known each other for a decade plus.
Such a small
And
world. Yeah.
and he and I went to the same school. The intern went to the same school as I did. So
Wow, such a small world. Like kind of everyone like you met and like had a good relationship, kind of getting them all together and building a company together in a sense.
yeah, it took years and years of just drinks,
Yeah,
dinner, just to persuade him to join the startup. But yeah,
that's
it's been a
awesome.
wonderful time. So
And then you said that like usually people who are in the gaming world, they tend to stay in the gaming world, right? So what like how did you transition from after selling your first startup from the gaming industry to like building a community for moms?
yeah, like there's a cliche question that people, kind of investors or founders ask other founders, like, hey, are you willing to put 10 years of your life into building this? And when you first like get asked that question, it's like, come on, like how do you know like what's gonna happen in 10 years? Like nobody knows,
Yeah.
right? But actually, the more you run your own company, the deeper introspection you kind of have to do about yourself, like what you feel motivated about, what you get burnt out about, how do you manage your own stress and stuff like that. And one thing that I realized was, while I enjoy playing games, I liked creating games, but I wasn't really finding fulfillment or a sense of purpose while creating games. I did it so that my first startup would not fail. It was not because I had a deep meaning for it, but because I didn't want to fail and I didn't want to disappoint our investor, my only angel investor, who used to be my former boss and my, I guess, second job. So I want to make sure the first company at least lands to a financial success. So I wanted to make sure that we do that. And my story was that because all the dots says software engineer, professional gamer, worked at a gaming company, you should know games, you should make games. So that was a very simpler story to tell myself and the investor. So did that. So it's kind of a pivot, right? And then doing that for a couple of years, realized, okay, this is not something that I want to do for the next 10 years. I felt part of my soul was dying. I loved the company building aspect, the culture, organization, and hiring, all that. That was really, really fulfilling. But actually, the outcome or the product that we were creating, the game was good, but it wasn't something that I could find myself, doing 10, 20 years.
Right.
So when it came, we sold. Compared to Sendbird, I feel like literally every problem, every time I jump on a call with customer, I feel re-energized. I'm like, oh my God, this is so meaningful. We're creating real value. We're solving people's problems and really making their life easier. That is like, I feel like I can do this forever. That's kind of when you kind of realize, okay, this is something that I can literally do 10 years. And we're actually getting close to 10 years now.
Wow.
So,
I also see that like you are very one of the people I've talked to who's very like have a lot of clarity on this, like right, like I struggled with this for a long time personally, and a lot of people I do talk to in the startup world, especially when you're young, you struggle with this purpose part and the vision part. And so I want to kind of learn more about that. Like, how did you get so good at it? Like having this kind of clarity on this, right? And number two, I also like read about like you follow the intrinsic motivation framework. I want to
yeah.
kind of know more about that as well. Like, so how can people figure out for themselves this whole thing of like how to have more purpose and better, like how to have a purpose and better clarity on deciding what they want to work on?
Yeah, there are multiple different angles to look at this. Like market sizing, you do top down, bottom up, analysis. I think there is some level of self awareness, or I guess some people call it intrapersonal intelligence. Like so, it's like meta intelligence. You want to know about yourself while knowing about some certain subject. Because ultimately, like when people say you have to be authentic about yourself, it's really not just like saying what's in your mind, but it's about living the life that you feel most natural at in terms of your own operating system. And everyone has a different operating system that's installed into your brain. One of the ways to look at it is like through personality assessments, right? Whether it be Big Five factor model or Myers-Briggs. I think Myers-Briggs is more better, widely used, better marketed, although Big Five factor model might be more accurate. So just to give you one example, right? I'm an ENTJ. So J is highly structured, goal oriented. I like to look at the goal and backward engineer what the steps need to do is, set up a plan, stuff like that. Whereas someone who's high P would be more like spontaneous, more fluid, creative, adapt to the new environment, whatever that's like given to them, they'll adapt to this new environment more easily. I'm a J, so I need to have this end picture in mind for me to find motivation and feel energized. And so kind of the way I motivate myself is to really think about what's been consistent throughout my life. What's my pattern of decision making, a pattern of priorities. And one thing that what's helpful was I discovered this diary of myself when I wrote when I was like 6 to 8 year old. My mom found it when she was cleaning the house. It's like and I thought I was a very like kind of creative, doing all different kind of things as a child. Turns out like 90% of my diary was about computers, writing software, editing, games, just figuring, building tools. And the other part was interesting was I was always creating communities around it. I was gathering a group of friends, setting community guidelines, protocols, call signals, passwords. It was all kind of team driven. So I'm like, okay, I got to do something technology, probably because I'm naturally attracted to that because of the way it scales. And two is I like to do it in group of people. So that kind of like was a kind of a good kind of rubric or pattern that I recognized from my early childhood. Now, one thing that I recognized I enjoyed doing while I was working at for some other company was when I was writing software, getting the software in hands of the users, and it was an internal tool. So obviously my customers were inside the company, and getting their feedback, and then iterating on that was so fulfilling, and I felt so much joy in that. And when someone was disappointed or excited, I felt like that feedback loop, that one cycle was so motivating for me that I felt like I could do this for the rest of my life. And that also connects with my early childhood diaries, how I love software, sharing the love for software to other people and hardware too, and then getting feedback and then try to sell it, get other people to use it and stuff like that. So all of this thing was always there. It's like this pattern has not changed. So this operating system will forever be there. And then again, because I'm Jay, I need to extrapolate what this looks like. And then what is my end game? What is my end picture for life was, and I said it probably in one of the interviews, is I define civilization as a collection of things that people take for granted, like electricity, water, internet, smartphones. Nobody even think about who created the first sewer system, hopefully, because it's so widely adopted and so widely used. And I want to create a technology-based product, hopefully good in design, that gets so universal that people take for granted, that becomes part of civilization. That dream, that kind of end game motivates me so deeply. That's literally what gets me up in the morning. Now, how do I get from here to there is, building things that scale, that have a massively global impact, like Sendbird. We're touching 100 million plus lives, we can get to a billion. So if you connect all of these dots, my pattern or operating system all the way to the end picture, it's a very clean, simple story to tell for myself. And because I have been thinking a lot about this, whatever other temptation that may come in, it's really hard to knock me off of my rails because there's a lot of structures and thoughts and patterns and operating systems I've installed around it. So there's some level of resilience around that. And a lot of this, again, is really understanding about yourself through self-awareness and also getting feedback from others and trying to, because our memories are very volatile, connecting the dots from the past and really see what that line looks like and just extrapolating to the future and then just cutting out all the noise and distractions that are not part of the core. Then I think you kind of find your mission in your life. That's a long rambling.
No, it's actually pretty cool. It's I think I would have to listen to this again and really like dig down deeper because there was a lot of stuff there, and there was a lot of good stuff there. But I am been on this kind of path myself where I'm trying to figure out what I want like long term, and so I can kind of relate what you're saying. But it's amazing that how much how much you've thought about this. I can already tell, just because there's so much here and it's such an interesting one. Um, and obviously as you grow and as you build a company, you learn more and about yourself and about what you want and stuff like that. Makes sense. But when you were young, or like as in like your first company in that sense, when you were building your first company, you're young in the startup world. I heard you say before that you started a company, and once you started, you realized it wasn't as glamorous as you thought it would be, right? I want to hear more about that. Like, why? What did you have in mind when you first got into the entrepreneurship world, and how different was it?
Yeah, there are a few different ways why it's not glamorous. I mean, I wasn't expecting like a glorious, like TV drama, like situations every day. But I thought a couple of things, right? If you're going to build a very product-led, strong product, strong technology company, what ends up happening, and this was advice given to me by some other entrepreneur, was if you love that, you'll probably, and if your company is successful, you'll probably end up doing everything except that. I'm like, what do you mean? What ends up happening is you actually have to hire the best and the brightest who can do that thing so well, much better than you. You have to hire those people and delegate. Otherwise, there's no other way to scale. or you just accept that your role is going to be that whatever chief product officer, and you end up hiring all the executives to do other things. If you're the CEO, your job becomes defining the mission of the company or vision, and then hiring the right team, motivating, and make sure the company doesn't run out of money, right? Happy customer, employee happiness, and then cash flow. I think Jack Welch said it too. So ultimately, your job is to bring the best and brightest who can actually do those jobs better than you, what's core to your business. And that kind of makes sense. So I kind of call myself as a chief beggar. I beg the customers to use our product. I beg the investors to give us money. I beg people to join our company. I beg our people to do the things that we need to do to hit the goals. So it becomes like a service org and service leadership, rather than the person's like, I'm going to do all of that, so you do all the other stuff. It actually becomes reverse. So it's not as glamorous. And two is just a sheer amount of effort and grind that goes into making something happen. It always takes longer, right?
Yep.
I thought I was pretty fast, but realized, okay, we're on our 8th year. I'm like, really? I thought it would be, why don't I have a private jet? Although I don't want a private jet. Why don't I have a private jet when I'm already 8 years into the Sendbird journey? The point is, it takes a lot more effort, a lot more teamwork, a lot longer than what you initially set out to do. So that's why I think having the 10-year mindset is so important. It's like 10-year, if you get to a 10-year, probably is, you still have a lot of potential to do more to create a value for the company. So it's such an arbitrary number, but at the same time, it's going to take far longer. So it's not as, again, glamorous like TV shows. It's going to be a long, long grind.
Yep.
And that's okay, because it's worth it and it's fun.
Makes sense. At what point of that grind, and that happened with your your product with the community for moms, where at some point you realize that, hey, we're not ready, we don't have those kind of numbers to raise Series A, and you saw this trend of people messaging popping up and stuff like that, right? And at what point do someone makes that decision where, and how it's also a difficult decision, right? Should I be persevering, or should I be pivoting to this trend, right? So one, how much of that is luck, riding that trend, and how much is skill to be able to identify the trend, and what's your advice for that?
I mean, luck exists everywhere all the time. Of course, some people are just in an environment has a little bit more luck than the others. So ultimately, is the perseverance, a little bit of flexibility, a little bit of the stubbornness, the balance is what helps you get a little bit more extra luck along the way. So the kind of visual image I have is, and this is commonly used in evolutionary algorithms or optimization theory, there's a concept of global optimum and the local optima, right? Think of it as like a landscape. There's a lot of hills and valleys. There's one gigantic mountain that's a global optimum. You obviously want to get there. There's small hills here and there scattered across the landscape. The thing is, you're kind of blindfolded. You don't know. You can't just look at a big mountain and climb there. You don't know what is in front of you. Only thing you can do is you can move around and feel if you're elevating or getting decreasing. What's opposite of elevate? But anyway, de-elevate. So either you're going up or down. You can feel if you're going up or down, or you can move around. Now you have to make a decision, right? Do I keep on going where it feels like I'm going up? But at one point, you might get stuck, and you don't know whether that's a hill. Is it a better hill, or is it the greatest hill ever? You just don't know. But so you gotta keep traversing around the landscape to figure out, hey, is there a next hill? But you gotta venture far out and have the courage to go downhill quite a bit to find the next bigger hill. Now that's divergence, right? Your convergence is going up the hill. Divergence is actually you're moving things around. Now the finding a product market fit is finding a really great hill. Maybe not the greatest hill. Finding a good enough hill is finding a good product market fit. You just have to keep doing what you're doing and grow. Now, when we got stuck at one point with our first product, felt like this hill was clearly not big enough, and our rate of climbing the hill wasn't fast enough. So I feel like, okay, the hill is kind of tapping out. We're not growing as fast. Our product market fit is not strong. We as a team is probably not the best fit for building this product as well. So our rate of growth wasn't impressive. So now we just had to figure out, okay, how much further of a divergence or exploration do we go? And I felt like right around the corner, there was a small kind of this narrow kind of hill that was connected to another hill that was like the chat API. It's like, okay, there's something there. I feel like I don't have to go all the way back down, but there's something that connects. But the dimension is still different because one was B2C and B2B. But from our view, there's a continuation of that path. So I kind of explored a little bit and immediately start feeling there's a greater hill that I can climb rapidly. So
Interesting.
I'm like, maybe that hill taps out really quickly too. We don't know. That's why we don't really know the market size when there's a new category. But we realize, okay, we can continue to climb the hill to $1 million AR and beyond pretty rapidly. So maybe this hill might be a much bigger hill than what we are used to be on. So it's really the balance between convergence and divergence, and then making sure that you're not converging too much or diverging too much. If you diverge too much, you're not going to climb any hills. You're going to jump ship.
Yep.
Like people when jump careers, it's also a bad thing for their career as well. So it's kind of the balance that makes sense.
How difficult was it as you're thinking about climbing that hill? How difficult is it to motivate your employees? Because you already had a lot of employees, you had money raised, right? And as you said, it's B2B versus B2C. It's a completely different beast
Yeah.
altogether, right?
I think one lesson learned from my first startup was it's all about expectation management. And expectation management is not it's also kind of an art in a way because it really comes down to psychology. Some people are okay with rapid changes. Some people need a lot more early heads up and structured reasons why, again, like Myers-Briggs, J and P, everyone reacts differently. And also you have multiple stakeholders, the employees, the users, and the investors, and I guess yourself. So I think overall, the entire pivot took about 6 months to 12 months. Initial 6 months was shifting our internal focus more to what became Sendbird. It used to be called Jiver, but we changed our name, long story short. But anyway, and then the external rest of 6 months was really creating the initial traction, persuading the investor this was the right decision, and then starting to prepare the transition for the users as well. So it was 6 months up, and by the end of 6 months, internally we are already kind of our body has turned already, and then it's a slow kind of validation. Right, this is a hypothesis. These are the things we want to see. If this works out, means we're on the right path, and kind of dropping the breadcrumb internally so that people can follow and get to their decision themselves. So by the time, okay, like we think there's something there, let's pivot. Like people have already been spending a lot of time thinking about it, investing, building on it. So I think it's important that we have to collectively understand how long it takes to move the group of people rather than just you turning around quickly and leaving everyone behind. So I think for me, it took about 6 months through expectation management.
Got it. Did you initially, obviously now as you have an amazing vision and obviously you're looking to do, as you said, like, you want to make a big impact and stuff like that. But initially, did you enjoy that B2B, the change from B2C to B2B? Like, it's a different, yeah.
Yeah. One thing that was surprisingly good about B2B was how clearly we can define a problem, and two, how direct of a connection we can have with a customer. B2C, you're kind of on your own, right? You launch a product, but if you're having games with millions of users, one user typically don't represent the majority of the users. So you have to really look at the data as a whole. You're doing experiments and measuring the funnel and stuff like that. So you get hyper focused on data, massive data. Versus B2B, it's like you just talk to a couple of good customers who you think best represents this problem. And if you solve it, they'll pay you. You don't have to like show them pop-ups like, hey, would you like to add this item to, like to boost your whatever time or stuff like that. It's like, hey, you solve your problem. How much are you willing to pay? Or we think it's fair to charge this. Would you agree? Then they pay you and boom, you solve the problem, you create a value and you get paid. So it's a very direct connection. And then it comes down to, again, convergence, divergence. How much of the request they're making is a generalized solution? Can we converge it? Or is it divergence? We have to cater to different ones through custom development work, stuff like that. More convergence you have around a generalized solution than you have a SaaS product or solution. So I felt like this direct connection made it far easier to build the initial traction. And I actually became a huge fan of B2B SaaS because it's actually repeatable in a lot of different ways.
That's very interesting you say that. So I kind of feel like what you're saying is usually people's biggest concern with B2B is, oh, it's a slow process, blah, blah, blah. But you're saying that if you create something which is of value, then it's like doesn't that all just goes out of the window because all about is it enough? Is it solving their biggest problem? And if it is, they're willing to pay whatever and everything just basically goes away.
Yeah, I mean, so B2C, they talk about product market fit a lot, right? I think B2B is like problem solution fit. Like they have a problem. Is it big enough for a problem and repeated scalable problem? You have a solution. Does it solve that problem? If it does, and people will pay you money if you charge it the right price. So it's a very clear value creation cycle, and kind of similar to my first job or second job's experience of creating something, getting users feedback, iterating on it, seeing them get delighted, so you can forever do this. It almost felt like that of building internal tools. So the feedback cycle is very direct, which I think was awesome.
Cool. So obviously now you're working with some big names like Hinge, Reddit, Gojek, right? What is the sales process like to be able to get these big brands to work with you?
Um, this is where luck played a little bit, and I can tell you why I think you can find other lucks like this. I kind of look at B2B or tech products into three different buckets, non-gaming, but problem-solving ones. One is hard tech like AI, machine learning, autonomous driving. Everyone thinks it's sexy, it's hard, investors want to give you money. The second category is productivity like Salesforce, CRM, any tools like GitLab that increase your productivity. Third is what I call messy tech. It's like it's messy. People don't really want to build it, don't want to talk about it. Investors don't really think it's a category. Like think about the early days of Twilio or SendGrid. Nobody believed that was going to be a big market. Turns out everything becomes a billions of dollars in market cap, if not revenue. And messy tech is kind of creating an abstraction layer of messy stuff that's happening underneath. And chat is kind of like that. SMS is kind of like that. Email is kind of like that. Nobody really wants to do it anymore. It's not really sexy anymore. And people often neglect it. And that's also what's happening in the HR space, like Gusto when it started out or things like that. There are a lot of segments in the market, especially in accounting or HR or any other areas where engineers don't really like to dabble in. There's a ton of room for innovation there, like construction or other industries. So I think we kind of lucked out in finding a category that we felt everyone thought there's going to be super crowded. Actually, it turns out, again, there's not a lot of choices there or good enough choices there. So we built that. And then what happens if you're kind of in that category is people look things up, but there's not a lot of solutions because, again, it's very messy. Nobody really wants to do it. So ended up, we get a lot of inbound. So to this date, I think 70 to 90%, depending on the quarter, of our revenue come from inbound through SEO, content, thought leadership, all those things. Now we do outbounds too because we have success cases. But early days, we had no money. We didn't raise enough capital. So only thing we could do was content and SEO, which kind of worked out even to this date. So yeah, except for Reddit, which was actually an outbound because they're YC. I kind of pinged Alexis like, hey, do you need chat? Initially, it's like, nope. And then it's like, actually, we talked about it in our previous board meeting. Here, me, CTO. I was like, no, we're going to build it. Then realize, okay, maybe we don't want to build it because it's messy. Our team had built it before in their previous jobs. They don't want to build it again because it's too messy. It's like, great, messy tech. So that's kind of how we won Reddit, long story short. But yeah, that's
But what would your advice be for someone who's not in messy tech and is trying to capture these big companies? Because that's the biggest thing I see a lot of people get scared about, right? They're like, oh, I don't know, it's a process, it's a long process, it has to go through all the politics and stuff like that when you go into a big company.
Yeah, I think if you say long process, we can obviously divide and conquer, right? And also depends on the customer segment. If you're selling to SMB, of course that's not true. If you're selling to mid-market, most of the time it's not true. If you're selling to enterprise, that's probably is true. But what you're really unpacking is the value proposition. Usually big companies take longer sales cycles. Yes, that's sure. But of course, there's procurement layer, legal layer, compliance layer. So there are some other components. You can run those processes in parallel. You don't have to run everything in serial. You can say, hey, why don't we start a separate thread around legal? Why don't we start a separate thread around security checks? And then once you get to compliances like ISO 27001, SOC 2 Type 2, things like that, those security processes get shortened. Legal, if you have a standard docs, if you have some level of experience, you can also shorten that a little bit. So there are ways to run process in parallel to shorten the sales cycle for if you're selling to enterprise. But if you're starting something new, you don't have to start with enterprise unless you have worked in company that previously sell to enterprises. You can start with a product-led growth, sell to SMBs and mid-market, and really build a fantastic user experience, and then really build a bottom-up adoption. Bottom-up sales cycle, bottom-up adoption is the new hot thing. Actually, it's not the new hot thing. It's just being recognized as a new hot thing, but it's always been there among developers. So I think really building a good experience, kind of like consumer, like in that way, but you can actually talk to customers and get them to try it, and then get them to pay for it by jumping on a call. So ultimately, to sum it up, I think YC mantra is really good and true one is talk to customer and build product, do nothing else. Especially true for B2B. If you talk to customer, they'll engage with you. If they're engaged and if you actually solve their problem, they're happy to work with you because you just made their life easier. Why
Yep.
wouldn't they want to work with you?
Yep.
So
Sorry, what did you mean by the bottom of adoption? Sorry.
a bottom up adoption. So
Yep.
instead of top down selling,
Right.
executive saying, hey, go
Yeah.
buy this software, someone in the team started using it, found it through grapevines or search. They test it out, they like it, they kind of invite other team members, and all of a sudden you realize, majority of the team is using it. Now the procurement is like, okay, why are you guys using this? Why are you guys using this? How much is it? We'll negotiate at a company level. So it's kind of that bottom up adoption.
Got it.
And that's kind of what's been driving a lot of like success for Jira, Slack, and things like that.
Perfect. So obviously now, as you said, like when you were before you completely pivoted to Sendbird in the early days, I remember you saying that you had like 12 or a dozen customers, 2 dozen customers before you completely pivoted. How, and some of them were your friends obviously, but like how did the first initial customers like happen for you?
Yeah, actually, the short video recording of that on the YouTube channel,
Okay.
search a positive tenacity, getting your first 100 customers. But long
Perfect.
story short is there's no golden path, right? You got to try everything there is, reaching out to your friends group, reaching out through YC, reaching out cold outbounds, did a ton of that, email campaigns, SEO, obviously, trade shows. We did a ton of that, and some of those channels will work for your demographic, right? Some industry will only buy things through trade shows. Now it's all virtual or grapevines or magazines. Some industry will just use SEO, like developers will search you up on Google, right? So really understand your customer's persona. What are the watering holes that they hang out? What are the communities? What are the channels they acquire new information, and search, do research on the products they should be buying or using, and really getting in front of those channels, I think is important. For us, it was a good mix of, again, content and SEO, and then some outbound through warm intros or through some networks like YC, and ultimately really begging friends to come and test out your product. And of course, your friends will be skeptical, like whatever you made is going to be shitty. They actually try it out. It's like, hey, it actually works. They'll start telling their friends about it. And also there's a decent word of mouth. One kind of hack is there are always some niche community that's overlooked by the big players. Small developer up and coming communities, small designer communities, pay attention to those. Because if you're at early stage, small scale, even if you have a couple of good opportunities coming out from those channels, it doesn't have to be massive. It's going to really help you with product roadmap, and they'll be your evangelist. And they can really help you get to the product market faster, and they'll also pay you. So there are small channels that you just have to find that turns out to be really small but very long-lasting channel for customer acquisition.
Very cool. Um, I want to actually, before one next question, now I'm kind of curious. What made you want to start the Positive Tenacity blog?
Uh, um, so I wrote quite a bit of blogging back in the days when I was in Korea, and it was kind of my own diary. It wasn't necessarily to get attention
Readership.
or
Yep.
get subscriber, but it was more of my record of myself, because I'm going to be so embarrassed like 6 months later, a couple of years later when I read this. I want to be able to see, it's like introspection all over again. It's like see my own progress. What are the things I've learned? What are the things I'm still stuck at? Kind of doing a self-diagnosis. And the best way to do that, because I learned so much from my own diary from 6-year-old to 8-year-old, I've been using that as a way to like kind of record what's top of mind for me, what are the things, decisions I've made, and then ultimately it's like a letter to my future family and myself. Yeah, so it's a little bit of that. So as you can probably read from my blog, it's not really, I guess, promoting or like try to attract users through listicles. It's more kind of self-record.
Love it. Cool. Um, my last question, actually, I want to ask you about YC, but before that, I want to kind of know about the market. So like you said you're empowering about 100 million users are using you guys, right? You're working with some amazing, innovative companies right now. And we're seeing the trends in the chat space with like the voice notes and the video trends. What other trends do you see that might happen in the next 10 years, or what companies are like, requesting from you guys?
Yeah, I think there's going to be just a lot of explosion of machine learning and AI. And I know people say it all the time, but I'm actually saying real practical use cases before it's like, oh, there's going to be some AGI chatbots going to, be a fortune teller for your life. I do think that's going to come someday. But I think right now, when you come down to specific use cases or verticals, I do think there's a lot of role for machine learning and AI to play. For instance, like moderation is something that we care about. So there are just a lot of messages that go through chat, right? And there's no company in the world who can hire 1,000 reps to go through all the chat history to, and there's also borderline privacy. If it's like private conversation, if it's public conversation, you can't possibly moderate everything that's happening on Twitch, for example, right? So there's some level of moderation that needs to happen automatically. Now, people are very smart at getting around moderation. If you block a certain word, people will figure out clever ways to still say the same thing without using the same spelling. So being able to adapt to those, ever-changing adaptation of the users is that's where machine learning will come in handy. And also other things like transactions. If you are ordering food, doing ride-hailing, making purchase, there's always a repeat conversation that comes in slightly different forms. There's usually a very good answer, right? So how do we create an automated template or smart response for the sellers or buyers? And again, through machine learning to drive up conversions and increase customer satisfaction, all that I think needs to be done through machine learning. Things like sentiment analysis, really understanding all of this. Right now, I think the Gen 1 was enabling conversations to is really understanding and giving those insights back to the platforms or the service providers so that they can actually improve their quality of their service. And I think the end users benefit from that as well. So I think that's going to be a massive, massive trend. Yeah, I guess we can stop there. But I think engage. And one thing I love about was it Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos said it. It's like don't think about what's changing, but think about what's not going to change. Is chat something new? It's like no, like people have been chatting since phone, Pony Express, telephones, or dial-up modem networks. We've always wanted to chat with someone in real life, synchronously or asynchronously. Now, mobile devices have completely gave that universal access to almost everyone. Because of that, messaging app took off. It's not because messaging is something that's new. There's an innate desire that's probably not going to change. Now VR is going to hopefully unlock some of those potential. Now we can actually travel and share experiences with other people in a lot more immersive way. There's got to be some human connection elements to that, whether through voice, video, physical interactions within a virtual environment, sharing 3D photos, 3D videos together. So how does that interaction kind of pan out? Of course, right now it's very limited due to hardware limitations. But with Quest 2, I think there's some glimpse of hopes there. So I think that's going to be a more of a longer term trend. But I feel like that's the only way for us to do space travel is through VR. Otherwise, we'll be bored to death. But if we are in a VR world, at least we'll be able to have fun while we're going to Mars and stuff like that. So I'm a very long VR believer, things like that. So
Cool. I want to ask you about YC. What was your YC experience like, and how much did like YC help to fuel your growth?
yeah, comparing YC to Techstars to give you some sense.
Right.
Yeah, Techstars I think is tightly knit, highly structured program. I think YC is a very loosely connected network. So YC is more on demand. You got to ask for an office hour. You got to go reach out to alumni network. You got to attend these XYZ. If you do nothing, you can literally get away through the entire program and do nothing and get nothing.
Yep.
Whereas Techstars have a structured program. You have trimesters, mentor weeks, whatever those things, right? One thing that I learned about a lot from YC was the simplicity of the philosophy. Talk to customers and build product, and how it's reiterated throughout the program. And then the alumni network's level of trust that was given by the alumni was astounding. Like I'd be able to share, and they'd be also share a lot of the kind of the, I don't say insider secret, but behind the scenes stories, all the things that didn't go right, that you would not be able to find on blogs and stuff like that. They're willing to share a lot of details that we could learn so much. So from again, because we didn't have any background in B2B, I didn't know anything about B2B. We accelerated learning through a lot of the advice from YC partners as well as alumni. And I want to credit Ilya, Sakar, former founder of Pars, and now is Metrics Partners, and also Ravi at Heap Analytics gave so much insight, Nicholas Algolia and so forth. So we learned a lot through YC Network of how to build a B2B company. And if it weren't for YC, we'd probably been dead already. I might be doing something else, but I think Sendbird would not have gotten to where we are today without the support of YC Network.
Wow, that's an amazing answer. Cool. I want to finish this off with 4 quick fire questions, 1 to 2 sentences.
All right.
All right, so we'll start with the first one. One unconventional thinking outside of the box kind of thing you guys did in your business when you were growing up, or when you were growing, or when you were, or even right now, anytime.
I'm not sure if it's outside of thinking box, but I do value, and it's not a popular opinion these days, but I do value work ethic. We really grinded ourselves out of death so many times. And what was surprising was people on the customer side actually appreciate work ethic. To give you one example, when we were trying to sell to Reddit, we were like, I don't know, 10, 20 people company. There's zero reason Reddit should buy from us or even trust us. We worked out of Reddit's office like a week straight, getting there in the morning, making sure we're like the last employees that were leaving Reddit's office. We did that. We weren't even in a contract. And I think we got a warning from their security teams like, who are you guys? Like, you're not employees, you're not contractors. Why are you guys working here? We're just trying to impress the Reddit people to buy from us.
That's amazing.
And they did. So I'm like, there are a couple of examples like that. And so people generally get surprised if they see people doing kind of inhumane things in a good way, then people kind of trust you. So yeah, grinding works.
That's amazing. Advice for someone applying to YC.
Um, I think crystallizing, removing all the fluffy words, just really getting down to the essence is important. One thing I heard from YC partners repeatedly during demo day was, if you get the investors to know what you're doing, that's already a success. Because most of the founders, and I've also angel invested here and there, most of the pitches you hear, it's like you don't know what they're doing after hearing them for 3 or 4 minutes. So really crystallize your thinking. Don't think in abstract terms. Really bring to concrete terms. Example, Sendbird, we originally pitched that like, we're a real-time communication solution for blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, you're chat API. I'm like, yeah, I guess we're chat API. So chat API is the kind of a level you want to pitch instead of real-time communication solution in the cloud. What does it even mean? Is it Skype? It's like, no, it's a chat API, right? So be crystal clear.
Cool. Advice for someone starting their first startup.
Balance the convergence and divergence, meaning you gotta be high conscientiousness, don't give up easily, really persevere for 10 years. But have a little bit of openness, flexibility to know when you need to make the change. But don't give up that easily. I see people giving up more often than changing. So
cool. And final question would be, if there was one thing that people could learn from you, something that has helped a lot in your life, what would that be?
Yeah, I had a couple of ideas, but one thing I want to say is remove choices in life, which is counterintuitive. Most people will optimize towards increasing optionality. Actually, if you remove the optionality, you get focus and resilience because you really don't have other choice. You get so much energy. It's like penetration, right? If you point all of the energy into a single spot, you can break through walls. But a lot of people have too many things going on, opportunity costs, too many ideas that they want to try out. They lose that perseverance and focus. That's where you actually don't get to greatness and become mediocre. So remove choices and make your life simpler. Then you'll be surprised how fast and how much further you can get.
Amazing answer. I also want to actually, when I was reading your reading a podcast or like a thing that you had from in the internet, and I saw one thing you had about Micromentor, which I thought was super amazing. Love if you could touch on that.
Yeah. So like one thing I had some luck of meeting good mentors early in my career. But one thing you kind of realize, and you also hear about this too, is like a lot of mentorships don't really last because a lot of people get disappointed by human flaws, and everyone has flaws. The issue is the longer you get exposed to someone, you kind of, it's like why you don't really respect your parents all the way, because they're human elements, right? But the way to get around it is everyone still has superpowers. It's just you're discovering other parts that you don't really respect anymore. It's just to really focus on that single dimension of that superpower, and then just thinking of that as a micro mentor, then you can learn from that person almost forever from that aspect. So then you realize everyone around you is kind of your mentor because everyone's at least super great at one thing. So then you can start to respect actually your close friends too, because your close friends are going to be awesome at certain things, and you kind of want to remember and kind of learn from that. So then the world is kind of your mentor, I guess. So that's kind of my concept of micro mentor.
It's such an amazing idea, too, because a lot of times you always hear people saying, like, don't ever meet your heroes because once you meet them, you're likely to be disappointed, and it's because your expectation of them is so much because you just think of them this one person, but like you said,
Yeah.
everyone's got human flaws, and they're not like that. They have that one part about them which is amazing, but the other parts are just like human, and which you might not connect with, or so it makes so much sense. I love this idea. It's a cool idea. Thanks, John. Appreciate you coming on the show. It was amazing. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was fun.
Cheers.